Welcome to TriTech University. My name is Bill Steppen, and today we are going to take a look at getting started with the accounts payable functions of the program. Welcome to everyone who is attending today. If you have not already done so, go ahead and click over on the left hand, or rather your right hand side of the screen, where you can log into the chat box and you can participate there. Feel free to put in your nickname down at the bottom and say hi, and introduce yourself if you'd like to anyone else who's attending, including myself. And in the meantime, let's go ahead and talk about what we're going to be taking a look at today. So we've done these kinds of sessions before. This will be an introduction to our accounts payable module. We're going to be taking a look at getting started with what vendor defaults are, how to set up vendors, and the basics of keying in vendor AP invoices, how to make payments against those, and then we'll be kind of wrapping up. Now, this will be building off of a little bit in what we covered last week regarding general ledger functions. There is going to be a little bit of that with this part of the session. So if you are not 100% familiar with that, don't be too concerned. You can always go back and check that recording out at your leisure, and then you can come back here at your leisure as well. If you're not using the general ledger module, if you're only using the accounts payable module, don't worry too much again about the actual general ledger parts. You can always dive into that at a later time. Or if you're not planning on using the GL functions at all, not a big deal either. Just you'll probably be using the default ledger functions that we'll be taking a look at today. So let's go ahead and switch over to my AIM-SI screen, or rather my AIM screen. I'm still saying that even 2 years later. And let's go ahead and kind of get started with what we talked about. So when you're getting started with accounts payable here in version 12, we've got something relatively new to version 12 that wasn't in prior systems, and that's going to be what we call vendor defaults. Now, a vendor default you will find in the AP part of the maintenance menu, and a vendor default is just a way to go in and define the normal expenses when it comes to the ledger defaults for expensing purposes. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit on this and make this larger, just to make it a little bit easier to see. When you first install the program, you will likely have two defaults to get you started: inventory and utilities. And over here on the right hand side of the screen, you will be seeing all of the general ledger chart of accounts that are in there by default. There's going to be some already marked in here, and when it comes to inventory vendors, these are the vendors that you buy products from. If it isn't already apparent, a vendor is basically someone who you buy products and or services from. So in the case of an inventory vendor, we're going to be expensing these invoices against inventory received. There's a 201-98 ledger account in here for that purpose. Whenever you receive inventory, the cost value of that inventory gets put into this accounts payable liability ledger account called inventory received pending invoice. If you weren't a fan of accounting, then you're in the wrong webinar. But that's basically the idea of it. It goes into this holding account or clearing account, so that when you then actually get the opportunity to put the invoice in, you can expense the cost value against that. Likewise, there is also a shipping freight in ledger account. This is the cost value of the expense of having this product shipped to you, typically in the form of freight. And again, these are going to be in there for you by default. Same thing for a utilities vendor, anyone that you buy your utilities from, your electricity, your internet, your water, your sewer, all of those different utilities you will have that you'll want to track as well. And there is one in here to get you started for that. That will be expensing by default to the 606-1 utilities ledger account. I set this one up in a prior live stream webinar session called a financial vendor. So anyone who you primarily do banking with. I've got this one set up, and just as an example, I've got that by default expensing to 634-1 professional services. Your mileage may vary when it comes to the setup of your chart of accounts. These are just the default accounts that are already in there. Now, as far as what this all means, we're going to see that when we get to keying in those vendor invoices. But before we even get there, let's talk about keying in a vendor. So if we go ahead and take a look, let me just switch up the screen up here so you can kind of see what I'm looking at. We will go to the modules and accounts payable menu where we have the option to add and change vendors in the system. Let's go ahead and I'll just switch this up over here so it's a little bit easier to see. I've got some vendors in here already. You can see that we've got Acme, we've got a Stag, Hal Leonard, Bank of America, etc., etc. And you can see over to the right, most of these are inventory vendors. I've got one financial vendor in here. Let's go ahead and add in a utility company. So I'll go ahead and click the Add button. And let's just make this a little bit easier to see again. So we're going to go ahead and call this a utility vendor. And in the name field, let's go ahead and type in, say, Commonwealth Electricity. And of course, I could put in addresses and phones and fax numbers and emails and anything that I want to have on record here. A couple of key additional helpful pointers that you may want to keep aware of. On the Details tab, you can put in details of your account with this company, such as your account number, your typical terms of purchase, any credit limits or minimum order amounts that you may have. In the case of an electricity company like this, most of what I'm just going to set up here is a 30-day term window. So when I get the invoice, I have 30 days to pay it. If there are any other details that you'd like to have on record, such as normal discount amounts for early payment, you can set things up like that as well. And then you can also flag whether these vendors have special features such as them being 1099 reportable, or if they require exchange rates for our international customers that purchase from over international borders and things like that. On the number 3 ledger tab, up at the top, you'll see there's an accounts payable ledger number. Let me see if I can zoom in on that even more, just to make the screen, again, a little bit easier to see. I don't know if this will be helpful at all or not, but just a little bit bigger. This is where, when you key in an AP invoice, that amount will be expensed. And again, we're not talking about a whole lot of ledger stuff here. I just want to kind of get the point across that if we're putting in some and just using the Beast General Ledger defaults, that'll be what you'll be wanting to have it go to. And then down below, these are going to be the common expense ledgers. So if you're, again, I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole of accounting, but there's always two sides to every ledger entry. And in the case of accounts payable, one side is going to be going into this 201-1 accounts payable side. The other side are the expenses below. In the case of an electricity company, that's going to be that 606-1 utilities expense. So if we were talking about an inventory vendor, that would be the receipt pending clearing and the shipping and freight. If we're talking about that banking or financial type company, that would be the professional services. And if it's a one-off vendor that you just want to have special setup for, by all means, you can just go right down here and check mark whichever the most common ledger accounts would be for your expense purposes. There are also some ordering and return tabs here. If you leave these blank, whenever you place an order with that vendor through the purchase order module, or if you flag something as being returned to that vendor through the inventory part, if you leave these blank, it'll just use the address information back here on the main tab. But if you do have these filled in, these will be an override to those. And then if you want to have any pop-up notes, you can certainly put that in here. That way you're reminded of certain details whenever you access this vendor. We've got a lot to cover, so I don't want to have too much on these details, but I just wanted to point them all out there. So all you really need to get started is a vendor default, a name. We're also going to put in a short name. We need to have that. We're just going to call this ComElec. just to have something in there, and we can save, and now we've got a utility vendor. So now let's say we got our monthly electricity bill that we need to put in so that we can mark it as paid. We're going to go into Modules, Accounts Payable, and enter AP Invoice. And let me see if I can drag this over just so that you saw where I was going there. Modules and Accounts Payable, and enter AP Invoice. When you go to enter AP Invoice, it'll ask who is the vendor that we're going to put that invoice in for. Let's go ahead and select Commonwealth Electricity. If I needed to, I could also add a new vendor on the fly. And now on the actual enter AP Invoice screen, let's just get this as, there, that looks pretty good. Okay, so when you're keying in an AP invoice, the primary details are going to be the invoice date, and that's just the date right off of the invoice. Let's just say this was 2 days ago on July 19th. Whatever the invoice number is, again, these are details coming right off of the invoice. Let's just say it's that number. And you can see there's already that 30-day term there. So when I use that, it's going to default the due date to be 30 days out. So in this case, 30 days from July 19th is August 18th. That should coincide right off of the vendor invoice. And then, at a very minimum, we need an expense amount. So this will be the amount of the invoice, again, right off of the invoice. Let's just say it's $200. Now at this point, if there's no other details, and that's usually going to be the case with a vendor invoice such as this for utilities, we can now expense that. We're basically telling AIM from an accounting standpoint, a ledger and bookkeeping standpoint, what this invoice is for. What did we buy with this purchase? We bought utility services. If we take a look at the tab for expenses, it's going to ask us what is the ledger that is being expensed. And you can see it's defaulting to 606-1 utilities. That's because this is a utility vendor where we use that default, and we told it that that is the primary and really the only ledger account that we would usually expense to. If we needed to, we could click on this drop down and change it to a different ledger account for expensing purposes. But we're really just going to leave that as is, and the full $200 was for electricity service. So we're going to expense that full $200 to utilities. We're going to save that, and if you watch up here, there's these 3 fields here where it says total invoice is $200. That's coming from the expense amount on the first tab. We haven't expensed anything yet, so we still have $200 left to expense. Let's go ahead and do that. We're going to put that in, and we're going to hit save. And boom, just like that, we have expensed the full $200. We have nothing left to expense, and we now have a save button down here in the corner, right by my finger. So as soon as I save that, that is now an active invoice in the system. And if we take a look into Modules and Accounts Payable and Vendor History, and let's go ahead and pull up Commonwealth, and we will see that we now show $200 due in the future, 21 to 30 days out. As time passes, that will move up this scale, and then ultimately, if it goes past due, it will move over here and go down this scale. This will also show on an accounts payable AP invoice with aging report. So if we go ahead and run this, and we're just going to run this as is, we're going to leave the analysis date as today. We're not going to focus on any individual payees or vendors or anything like that. Let's just go ahead and run that, and we'll throw it to the screen, and this will probably pop up on my other monitor just per usual. Let's go ahead and see if I can't make this just kind of show up over here on my focused area. So you can kind of see, that was the wrong window, that we are showing that vendor for Commonwealth Electricity. It's showing the invoice of 435365, just the random numbers I punched in. There's the due date. I haven't paid anything yet. There's a balance due, and it's due $200 out on the 18th. So it is not yet due. We can kind of see in this line here that this is due out into the future. So we have a grand total of $200 due. That's the only invoice in this system. Obviously, when we're talking about a live business, this is probably going to be a lot more numbers all over the place. Hopefully, they're all going to be in that future due and none in the past due. So that is the primary report for keeping up to date on your expenses. Now, as far as getting this invoice in here, we've taken care of that. Now, we are going to, of course, need to pay that when it comes time to mark it as paid. There's two typical ways that you would do that. One is you would either write a check or log in and pay it online. You can also still use AIM to print checks if that is your fancy. Let's talk about all of these different methods. If you're just basically logging on to either the vendor website or doing online banking through your bank, and you basically paid it online, you're going to tell AIM that you paid it in that fashion by going to Modules and AP and Check Disbursements. When you run this program, it's going to ask who is the check disbursements for. Let's go ahead and select Commonwealth Electricity. Bring this up here so you can see it. So up at the top, it's going to ask us for the payment details. What checking account is this coming from? There's a checking account number 1 by default in your system. This is going to be basically your primary checking account. There's also a vendor prepay clearing. This can be used for the purposes of essentially marking that you paid it with a credit card. And the vendor prepay clearing is another form of liability ledger account that basically just defers the payment down the road. But we're going to basically mark that this was paid right out of pocket. We either, again, hand wrote the check or we logged on and paid it online. Either way, you'll see two options here. One is to key in the check number. This will keep track of a last used check number. Mine is set to 5001 is the next check number. If I hand wrote that check, I'll leave that as is, verifying, of course, that this is the date that I wrote it and the check number that was used. If I paid it online, I can check mark this electronic funds transfer option, and then I can put in the online reference number, the EFT reference that came either, again, from the bank or from the online portal. I'm going to go ahead and mark it that way. So let's just again put in a random number here. Again, this would typically come from the website. And then down below, I'm going to see all of the open invoices. And I can sort these by any of these columns. There's, of course, just the one. Now, if I double click on this, this will open up a little window where it's going to say amount to pay. Here's the full balance of $200. I'm not getting any discount for early payment. I'm not going to shortchange the invoice at all. I'm going to pay the full $200. I'm going to confirm that by hitting enter. And we will see that now shows in the amount to pay column, as well as up here, it's showing that there is no balance anymore. This will be the new balance of $0, and the total of my payment is coming out to that $200. If there are multiple invoices here, I can just go down the line, double-clicking and selecting as necessary, or I can right-click and say Tag All if I'm marking them all as being paid. Let's go ahead and save that, and that is now paid. So if we go once again back and look in the AP vendor history and pull up Commonwealth, you'll see there's no longer a balance there. And if I go and take a look at the invoices, I can say I want to see all invoices, and there is that invoice. It has been paid. I can go take a look at that payment here on the Payments tab. So all of that activity is tracked. If there's ever any question of an invoice that was paid through the system, you can certainly go back here and look that up. Now, another way that you can pay invoices in the system is to select those invoices for a batch print job. So I'm going to go ahead and key in another invoice. This time I'm going to key in an inventory invoice just for variety. Let's go to Enter AP Invoice, and let's say I'm getting one from Acme Wholesalers. Why not? So this invoice, let's just again say that this is for today. There's the invoice number. I've got 15 days to pay this one. And let's pretend it's $300. And of that $300, a certain amount of that was inventory and a certain amount of that was shipping. Now, the way we denote that, as you hopefully picked up on, is on the expense tab. So over here in the ledger dropdown, you'll notice it didn't pick anything immediately this time. And that's because we have more than one ledger account that we have selected as a primary expense. So Of the $300 to expense, we're going to start off by expensing the cost value of the inventory. In my hypothetical setup here, let's pretend it was $250. So we say $250 for the amount and save that. That's now showing $250 as having been expensed. We have $50 left to expense. That is the shipping or the freight charge on my invoice. Let's go ahead and add that. I'll click the Add button. Come back here to the ledger dropdown, choose shipping freight in. It will default to that remaining $50. I will save that. And now that my total left to expense is 0, I can go ahead and save. So now let's pretend I've got several of those keyed in. And now I want to have AIM do a batch check printout. I want it to basically print one check per vendor for any expenses that I want to basically mark as paid and get them paid. I can flag invoices for payments in one of two ways. I can go to the AP module and I can either select invoices by vendor or by date. If I select invoices by vendor, it's kind of the same idea as what we just saw in the check disbursements area. We would select the vendor. There's the invoice. Let me bring this up to the screen so you can kind of see it. So I could make a selection from there by right-clicking and selecting, or again by double-clicking and essentially doing that same thing, and then ultimately hitting save. I'm not going to do it this way because typically what I believe is going to be more beneficial and more cost effective for you and for your dollars that you're spending is to do this by date. You typically want to pay them as they're coming due so that that money sits in your checking account and, or even better, your savings account, and it's earning interest for you. I'm by no means a banking consultant, but I believe that to be a pretty good strategy. Let's bring this screen up here. So up at the top, you can see we've got several filters that we can use to drill down on invoices that we want to pay. I'm just going to make the cutoff date be, let's say, August 15th, so midway through next month. And then I can make other selections here and ultimately hit refresh. There's the invoice that I just keyed in. It fits our selection criteria. It's due before the cutoff date of 8/15 because this is due on 8/5. And then from here, I can double click and make those individual amounts of what I'm actually going to pay on it. Or I can right click and just tag all. I'm going to go ahead and do that. And it's now showing that that check amount is going to be $300 for that invoice. Now we're going to go ahead and save that. Now that does not actually mark them as paid. It just marks them as to be paid. To do the actual batch check printout now, we will go to the reports menu. When we're ready to do the batch check run, you will take laser checks and you will load them into your printer, and you will go to the AP, the accounts payable report menu, where you can go and print checks selected. This will print one check per vendor for any invoices that have been flagged to pay in this fashion. And typically these are going to be in a 3-part format: stub, check, stub. I'm just going to go ahead and print this to screen. Before I do, it's the same kind of concept as we had when we did the check disbursement. It's going to ask us what is the checking account that this is basically going against. It's going to ask us what is the starting check number. It will also ask us for some other details. Do we want to run this in a particular order, either alphabetically or numerically based on the vendor accounts? And then do we want it to also print the account number of our account with these vendors on the stubs? Do we want it to print the check number on the checks? You may or may not want that if the checks already come with numbers on them. Do you only want to print that on the bottom stub? Or a more modern function is to have these being paid through an ACH transfer. So if you wanted to have this being something you could send to your checking or to your bank in the form of like a treasury file, you could check mark this option to export this that you could then send to your bank. You may want to just make sure that your bank supports that kind of process. Anyway, let's go ahead and run this report and just print it to the screen. And again, I will just bring this over so you can see what this looks like. So envision this as a 3-part check. So the top part is a stub, the bottom part is a stub, and the middle part is a check. Let's just go ahead and zoom in on that. So this will hopefully be a little bit easier to see. So again, the top part is the check, or rather the stub. You can see it's showing the invoice that was paid. As we scroll down, this would be where your pre-printed logo is on your check, along with the pay to the order of, and then the amount to pay, and so forth. And then a bottom voucher that that you can either send or keep. So that's the concept there. Now, if you actually wanted to, and actually just to wrap this up, you will see it's going to come up and ask me to not continue with updating until printing has completed. This is a very important function. When we're talking about printers, as you're probably aware, printers never work right. There are paper jams, there's out of toner messages, there's all kinds of things. So if you have a problem when you do your printout, you can say no on this, and then AIM will act like the check's never printed at all. That'll give you an opportunity to go and figure out what the heck went wrong with your printer, and then you can try again. So that basically you can then say, do it again, and then when the checks do print out, that's when you will say yes, and everything will be marked as having been paid at that time. Now, just a couple of other little helpful tidbits to get you started. If you already actually paid that invoice before you even had an opportunity to put it into the system, you paid it with like an electronic transfer or something of that nature, when you're keying in the invoice, you'll see that there is an option, let's go ahead and just bring this back up, to flag it as having been paid via an EFT. If you check mark this, put in the reference number, select the check date, and then put in the EFT date, as soon as you save that, what that will do is not only will that show as the vendor invoice being in the system, but it will also show it as having already been paid out of this checking account. So that's one way of getting the invoice in and also marking it as having been paid. If you want it to be immediately marked for the next check batch run that you do, you can flag up here. Of course, I can't do both at the same time. But if you check mark up here, then, and so I'm saying I need to enter the value for expense first. But anyway, when you mark it to pay, that will then immediately flag it so that you can just go straight to the print check selected. So that's another way of getting it, essentially getting ready to pay right away when you're first keying it in. And the last little thing I want to talk about before we kind of wrap up today's session is maybe you want to actually tell the system to print the check right away instead of flagging it for a batch and then doing a batch run of one check. So another thing you can do is in Accounts Payable, the reports menu, you can go to what's called a print individual check. This print individual check essentially is a combination of keying in the invoice and printing the check at the same time. So when we go to print individual check, it's going to ask you, who is this check for, or who is this vendor that you're making the purchase from? Let's go ahead and select Bank of America. And then it will bring up this print individual check window. And if we look at this, the left-hand side is the check details. So who is the check for? What's the check number? What's the invoice date? So we're kind of getting into the AP invoice part of it. So we can put in the invoice date, the invoice number. Let's go ahead and click on that. What's the amount of the invoice? Let's say it's $500. Is there anything that we want to have in the memo field? Are there any notes we want to put on it? And then we come over and we expense that here in the ledger expense area. And if you look up here at the top, this is the checking account from which it's going to get paid. So just to wrap this up, let's go ahead and expense that $500 to the 634-1 for professional services. And now that I have it all keyed in with all the details, I can click Run Report. I can print this out, and we will see that, if I can get this again to kind of show up here so that you can see it nice and easily. Again, it's going to show the vendor details here, the invoice number, the amount that's paid, and it's marking it as paid right away. And then, of course, once again, it will ask me to continue with updating, assuming that the check goes through the printout just fine. So that is the whole idea of enter AP invoices, and getting started with the invoice accounts payable module in general. There's a lot more details available that you can find in our video portal here. You can go down the quick start or the quick list playlist option, switch down to accounts payable. We've got other videos there that we've done in the past. If there's any topics you'd like to see me cover in the future, definitely come here into the video portal and click up at the top where you will see a poll option. We've got some great suggestions on there already. Definitely go ahead and put in your recommendation for future live stream topics. And I'm pretty much going to be covering them all at this point, but we will see who has the most popular topic, and that will be the first one that we cover after we get through our current schedule here up through the end of August or so. But definitely keep in touch with us. We're here to help you make the most of your software investment with us here at TriTech and the AIM software and our Active e-services. So if there's ever any questions that you have, definitely give us a shout. Be more than happy to help you out any way we can. And that's all that I have for today. We will see you next week when we will be looking at invoicing, AP invoices, and reconciling those with inventory purchase orders so that you can really combine those two modules and get the most bang for your buck. Thank you so much. We will see you next week, and I hope you have a great day. Take care.